Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, casting golden streaks across the room. I had been washing dishes, my hands submerged in warm water, when she appeared behind me. So close I could feel the faint brush of her perfume, subtle yet intoxicating. "Tell me," she said, her voice low and teasing, "why do your eyes tremble when you see me?" I froze mid-motion, a plate slipping slightly from my grip, my pulse suddenly loud in my ears. Her gaze held me captive, a soft intensity that made it impossible to look away. She leaned slightly closer, the curve of her smile just enough to make my stomach twist with anticipation. There was a playful light in her eyes, yet underneath it, a dangerous electric tension that made the air between us feel thick and charged. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, almost daring me to respond, while my mind raced, caught somewhere between panic and fascination. The hum of the kitchen felt distant, every heartbeat echoing in my chest. When her fingers lightly touched my shoulder, brushing almost imperceptibly, it sent a shock through me that had nothing to do with the water on my hands. She tilted her head, studying me as if she already knew the answer but enjoyed watching me squirm. A mischievous smile played on her lips, and I felt both exposed and drawn in, a magnetic pull I couldn't resist. Silence stretched between us, comfortable yet unbearably tense, each second brimming with unspoken words and possibilities. I swallowed hard, unsure whether to speak or run, and before I could even decide, she moved just a fraction closer, her perfume enveloping me entirely. My thoughts scattered, and yet, a part of me wanted to stay, to see where this teasing, dangerous closeness would lead. And then, she leaned in slightly, close enough that I could almost feel her breath, and whispered, "You don't have to hide it from me." My chest tightened, and I knew something was about to happen. But what? Even as I tried to focus on the mundane task of drying dishes, her presence lingered in every corner of the kitchen, in every warm ray of sunlight. It wasn't just her physical closeness that unsettled me. It was the way she seemed to see straight into me, past the casual defenses I'd built, past the calm facade I showed to the world. We hadn't always been like this. When she first became my stepmom, our interactions were polite, measured. I respected her, admired her even, but there had always been an invisible barrier I was careful never to cross. Somewhere along the way, those boundaries blurred. Moments I would have ignored before, her laugh lingering a heartbeat too long, her casual touches, the way she tilted her head when she looked at me, began to affect me more deeply than I wanted to admit. There was a vulnerability in her too, I realized. Beneath the confident smiles and teasing remarks, she carried a quiet loneliness. Sometimes I would catch her staring out the window when she thought I wasn't looking, lost in thought, almost wistful. It made her seem human, real, not just the composed, alluring figure she presented to everyone else. And yet, it made my heart ache in ways I couldn't name. It was in those small, fleeting moments that I felt the tension most strongly. When she brushed past me in the hallway, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in my nose. When she handed me a mug, and our fingers touched just long enough to make me forget the task at hand. When she would whisper something teasing, and I laughed despite the way my pulse thrummed against my chest. Each incident was a spark, building toward something neither of us dared name aloud. And yet, the cracks in our dynamic were there too. I could sense her frustrations, the unspoken questions about why I was so cautious, so hesitant around her. There were days when the tension boiled beneath the surface, and her sharp glances or sudden silences made me painfully aware of the desire I couldn't voice. She noticed it too, that trembling in my gaze, the way I avoided her eyes when the room felt too small, too charged. We circled each other in this silent, unspoken dance, aware of the pull, yet fearful of the consequences. Every brush of skin, every shared glance, was loaded with possibility. But we had yet to cross the line, for fear, for restraint, or perhaps for the suspense that made each encounter feel electric. And as the sun dipped lower, painting the kitchen in deeper shades of gold and amber, I caught her watching me again. This time, the look held something new, something bolder, almost daring me to respond. My chest tightened, and I realized that the fragile balance we had maintained was on the verge of tipping. The evening had settled in, casting the living room in a soft, amber glow. I found myself sitting on the couch, pretending to scroll through my phone, though every muscle in me was aware of her presence nearby. She was rearranging the cushions, humming softly, and even that simple act seemed to draw my attention like a magnet. Then the doorbell rang, and she paused, a shadow crossing her face. "That must be your friend," she said casually, but I noticed the subtle tightening around her eyes, the barely perceptible pause in her movements. My pulse spiked, not from the interruption, but from the flicker of something protective, almost possessive, that I hadn't seen before. It was a feeling that made my stomach twist, a mix of fascination and guilt that I couldn't ignore. When my friend arrived, she lingered in the room, a drink in hand, smiling politely. Yet every glance she cast in my direction carried an unmistakable edge, and I felt it. The sudden surge of jealousy, a foreign and uncomfortable thrill that stirred a longing I wasn't ready to name. She laughed at a joke I didn't make, her eyes briefly meeting mine, and in that fraction of a second, the air seemed to crackle. I wanted to look away, but my gaze was locked, drawn into something magnetic and forbidden. Later, when my friend left, she stayed behind, leaning against the doorway with an almost casual grace that made my chest tighten. "You seemed distracted," she said softly, a smirk tugging at her lips. The room felt smaller, hotter somehow, as though the space between us had shrunk without warning. I wanted to speak, to explain, but the words tangled in my throat. And then came the charged silence, our shared breaths, the faintest brush of her fingers as she passed by. Every glance carried the weight of unspoken words, every small movement an invitation to cross an invisible line. It was dangerous, exhilarating, and I realized with a jolt that the line we had both been careful to avoid was closer than ever. I didn't know how long I could resist, or if I even wanted to. The house was unusually quiet that night, the hum of the city outside barely reaching us. She had asked me to help with some paperwork in her study, and the moment I stepped inside, the door clicked shut behind me. The air felt heavier, charged with a tension neither of us could ignore. We stood on opposite sides of the desk, sorting through papers, but every movement brought us closer. I could feel her presence in ways that had nothing to do with the paperwork. Her perfume drifting subtly, the gentle rustle of her clothes, the occasional brush of her hand against mine as we reached for the same folder. My pulse raced, each breath coming faster than the last. Yet we neither spoke nor moved apart. She glanced up at me, and our eyes locked. In that moment, the room seemed to shrink, our proximity unavoidable. Her expression was soft but daring, a playful challenge hiding beneath a veil of seriousness. I tried to focus on the papers, my hands trembling slightly, but her gaze held me captive. The silence stretched, thick and electric, every heartbeat echoing in my ears. When she reached to hand me a pen, our fingers brushed, and the brief contact sent a shock through me I wasn't prepared for. She lingered just a fraction too long, smiling knowingly, and my chest tightened with a mix of longing and fear. Every subtle motion, every glance, carried a weight of unspoken desires we both pretended to ignore. I wanted to step back, to find the courage to say something, yet some part of me wanted to stay, wanted to see how far this closeness could go. She tilted her head, a teasing glint in her eyes, and whispered, almost to herself, "You feel it too, don't you?" My breath caught, the air between us charged with possibilities we had never dared voice. The moment felt suspended, as if time had slowed, and I realized that whatever restraint we had maintained was about to shatter. And then, just as I opened my mouth to speak, the study door creaked, and a shadow crossed the threshold. Someone else had arrived, unaware of the tension in the room. The next move was impossible to predict. The study was thick with tension, the air so charged that every movement felt amplified. I froze as the shadow at the door stepped into the light. My friend from earlier, holding a letter in their hand, eyes wide with something I couldn't read at first. Before I could react, she stepped closer to me, her hand brushing mine again, a silent plea for calm. "It's not what it looks like," she whispered, her voice trembling just slightly. My chest tightened, the pulse in my ears loud enough to drown out reason. The letter slipped from my friend's fingers and fluttered to the floor. I bent down to pick it up, and when I unfolded it, the words inside made my stomach drop. It was a confession, written in her handwriting, meant for no one but me. She had been carrying the weight of her feelings, hidden desires she had tried to suppress, her longing carefully masked behind playful teasing and casual smiles. My mind spun as I looked up at her. Her eyes were wide, vulnerable, yet daring, exposing the raw truth she had kept buried. "I couldn't say it before," she admitted, voice barely audible. "I didn't know how, or if I should. I wanted to speak, to tell her I felt the same, but my words caught in my throat." The room seemed to constrict around us, the warm evening light accentuating the intensity of the moment. Every glance, every fraction of a second, carried the weight of unspoken truths finally brought to the surface. Then came the twist I hadn't anticipated. My friend, who had delivered the letter, took a step back, hesitating, and revealed that they had known more than I realized. They had seen the subtle closeness, the teasing glances, the small touches that had set my heart racing for weeks. "I think it's time you both stop pretending," my friend said softly, almost conspiratorially. The words hung in the room like a challenge. For a heartbeat, we all stood frozen. 3 people in a room that suddenly felt far too small. Every instinct screamed caution, yet the magnetic pull between us was undeniable. The letter, the touch, the stolen glances, they were pieces of a puzzle that demanded resolution. Her hand found mine again, firmer this time, and I felt a jolt of clarity. The longing, the tension, the secrecy. It all culminated in that single, unspoken promise. Things could never go back to the way they were. Something had shifted irreversibly, dangerously, and beautifully. And just as I opened my mouth to speak, the front door clicked. The sound of another arrival, another layer of uncertainty, throwing everything into chaos. What would happen next? The answer teetered on the edge of possibility, daring us both to cross the line we had only whispered about until now. The tension in the house was palpable the next morning. The letter, now folded neatly on the table, had changed everything. We were no longer circling each other with unspoken glances. Every glance, every word, carried consequence. She stood by the window, her arms crossed, gaze fixed on the street below. I approached cautiously, my chest tight, every step weighted with the knowledge that nothing could be unsaid. "We need to talk," I finally managed, my voice low but firm. She turned, and for a moment, the vulnerability in her eyes made me hesitate. Then the storm came. "Do you realize what this could mean?" she asked, the tremor in her voice betraying both fear and longing. "All this time we've been pretending, dancing around something we both feel, and now it's out there." I swallowed hard, feeling the pulse of guilt, desire, and something dangerously close to hope. "I know," I admitted, "and I don't want to pretend anymore. I can't." Her hands shook slightly as she brushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Then what do we do? What about everything else? The house, the family?" Her voice broke, and I realized how much she had been holding back, how carefully she had contained her feelings all this time. "I don't know the answer yet," I said honestly, stepping closer. "But I do know that I can't ignore what we've felt. I can't act like this tension, this attraction, doesn't exist anymore. I'm done pretending." For a heartbeat, silence hung between us. Tense, electric, and raw. Then she let out a soft sigh, part relief, part surrender. "I was so afraid," she admitted, the words barely above a whisper. "Afraid of crossing a line we shouldn't. Afraid of losing everything if we were honest. And yet," I said, reaching for her hand, "here we are, honest, and maybe that's worth more than the fear." Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile, the tension between us slowly easing into something warmer, safer, yet still thrilling. The chaos of the previous night, The letters, the confessions, the near reveals had forced us to confront our true feelings. Now, the only question was how we moved forward. And just as we stood there, hands lightly touching, heartbeats synchronizing, there was a quiet knock at the door, a gentle reminder that life, with all its complications, still awaited us. But inside the room, for the first time, the tension had transformed into clarity, intimacy, and the possibility of something more. The story wasn't over. It was evolving, and whatever came next, we would face it together. The late afternoon sun poured through the living room windows, casting everything in a soft golden glow. After the whirlwind of tension, confessions, and near misses, the house felt peaceful for the first time in weeks. We stood together, hands intertwined, hearts still fluttering from the emotional storm we had weathered. She looked at me, her eyes reflecting relief, warmth, and something deeper, trust. "I can't believe we finally spoke honestly," she said, her voice soft, almost shy. "It feels like a weight has been lifted." I squeezed her hand gently. "It's amazing how much clarity can come from chaos," I replied, smiling. "I don't want to waste another moment pretending or holding back." We moved closer, the distance between us disappearing entirely. There was no need for grand gestures, just the quiet comfort of being near each other, of sharing a space without walls, without pretense. I rested my forehead lightly against hers, feeling the rise and fall of her breath, the warmth of her presence grounding me. A small laugh escaped her lips. "You know, I was terrified of this moment," she admitted, her fingers tracing gentle patterns along the back of my hand. "But now, I can't imagine it any other way." I smiled, feeling the tension of the past weeks melt into something tender and enduring. "Neither can I," I said. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." And in that golden light, everything else faded. The teasing, the longing, the suspense. It all had led to this quiet, undeniable connection. A soft breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers, and I realized that the anticipation, the longing, the hidden desires, they were no longer secrets. They were part of a bond that had grown through honesty, courage, and shared vulnerability. She leaned into me, resting her head lightly on my shoulder. "I feel like we've finally found our rhythm," she whispered. "No more hiding, no more pretending." I wrapped my arms around her gently, holding her close. "Exactly, just us. And maybe that's enough." For the first time in weeks, we both felt entirely seen, entirely understood. The tension, the jealousy, the near misses, they had shaped something real, something lasting. And as the sun dipped lower, painting the room in amber tones, we stood together in quiet harmony, knowing that the story we had written between us was only just beginning, but beginning with honesty, warmth, and a love that felt undeniably ours.